My name is Daniel Mercer, and until 6 months ago, I was living what most would call the American dream in the small town of Pineville, Massachusetts. Population, just under 12,000. The kind of place where everyone knows your business before you do it out. I'm 42 years old, own a modest but successful hardware store that my father left me, coach Little League on weekends, and had what I thought was a happy marriage of 15 years to my high school sweetheart, Rebecca. We have a colonial-style home on Maple Street with a white picket fence. Yes, an actual white picket fence that I built with my own hands the summer after we were married. 2 cars in the driveway, my Ford F-150 and Rebecca's Subaru Outback. No kids, though not for lack of trying in our early years. Eventually, we made peace with it being just the two of us, or so I thought. Rebecca worked as an office manager at Pineville Medical Associates, the town's largest medical practice. That's where she met him, Dr. Andrew Keller, the new orthopedic surgeon who moved to town about 2 years ago. Ivy League educated, divorced, no kids. The kind of guy who wears designer clothes on casual Friday and drives a Tesla in a town where that still turns heads. Looking back, I can pinpoint the exact day when things began to change, though I didn't recognize it then. It was a Tuesday in October, unseasonably warm. Rebecca came home late from work, flushed and animated, talking about a new initiative at the office. Dr. Keller had suggested modernizing their patient management system, and Rebecca had volunteered to head up the transition. It's going to mean some late nights, Danny, she'd said, her eyes not quite meeting mine. But it's a great opportunity. Dr. Keller says I have a real knack for systems management. I remember feeling proud of her. Proud? Jesus. That's great, Beck, I said, squeezing her shoulder as I passed her to get to the fridge. You deserve the recognition. That night, she spent an extra 20 minutes in the shower. When she came to bed, she smelled different. A new body wash, she told me when I asked. I kissed her goodnight and fell asleep with my arm around her waist, completely unaware that I was holding on to something that was already slipping away. The late nights became regular. Twice, then 3 times a week. Always with a text around. 6 p.m., still at the office. Don't wait up for dinner. Sorry, I didn't suspect anything at first. Rebecca had always been dedicated to her job, and I trusted her completely. We'd been together since we were 17. High school sweethearts who married at 27 after I took over the hardware store. She'd stood by me through my father's death, through the lean years when big box stores threatened to put us out of business, through our failed attempts at starting a family. Why would I doubt her now? But small towns have a way of making secrets impossible to keep. The whispers reached me in fragments, casual comments that seemed innocent enough until they formed a pattern. Saw Rebecca's car still at the medical center at 9 last night. That new system must be a real bear to implement, Mrs. Hartley mentioned while buying light bulbs. Dr. Keller sure seems to appreciate your wife's dedication, Jim Coleman said. Over beers at O'Malley's, a strange emphasis in his voice that I chose to ignore. Then came the changes at home. New clothes, a different hairstyle, more makeup, a sudden interest in fitness that had her joining the gym where Dr. Keller was known to work out each morning. Still, I trusted her. I dismissed the knot in my stomach as insecurity, as the natural anxiety of a middle-aged man whose wife was suddenly blossoming in ways that had nothing to do with him. It wasn't until the first weekend in December that I found out. Rebecca had gone to a medical office management conference in Boston. At least, that's what she told me. She'd be gone Friday through Sunday. I used the opportunity to surprise her by remodeling our guest bathroom, a project she'd been asking me to tackle for months. That I was at the hardware store late Friday, gathering supplies, when my friend Mark Stevens came in. Mark is a state trooper who patrols the highway between Pineville and Boston. Hey, Danny, he said, leaning against the counter. Thought Rebecca was heading to Boston today. Yeah, I replied, ringing up a box of tiles. Some conference. Back Sunday. Mark frowned. That's weird. Could have sworn I saw her and Dr. Keller at the Mountain View Inn about an hour ago. His Tesla's pretty distinctive. The Mountain View Inn was a rustic getaway about 30 miles from Pineville, in the opposite direction from Boston. Known for its romantic weekend packages, I felt something cold settle in my chest. Must have been someone else, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor starting in my hands. Mark looked uncomfortable. Yeah, probably. My mistake. But it wasn't a mistake. I knew it. And from the pity in his eyes, so did Mark that I closed the store early and drove home in a fog. Once there, I sat in my truck for a long time, staring at our house with its perfect white picket fence, wondering what to do next. Part of me wanted to drive straight to the Mountain View Inn and confront them. Another part wanted to pretend I'd never heard Mark's words, to go on believing in the life I thought we had. In the end, I did neither. Instead, I went inside, poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon, and sat in the dark of our living room. As the liquor burned its way down my throat, one thought crystallized with perfect clarity. I would not be made a fool of in my own town. If Rebecca and her doctor thought they could laugh behind my back, if they thought I would break down or lash out or slink away in shame, they were about to learn how completely they had misjudged Daniel Mercer. I wouldn't confront them. I wouldn't rage or plead or threaten to know. I would do something far worse. I would destroy them so methodically, so completely, that they'd never recover. And I would do it with such precision that they'd never even see me coming. That night, as I nursed my bourbon in the dark, the plan began to take shape. By morning, when I finally went upstairs to our empty bed, I knew exactly what I was going to do. Rebecca would return on Sunday, smiling and full of fabricated stories about her conference. I would smile back, ask all the right questions, and pretend that nothing had changed, but everything had changed, and the game had already begun. The art of warfare, according to Sun Tzu, is based on deception. Appear weak when you are strong, and strong when you are weak. When Rebecca returned on Sunday evening, wheeling her overnight bag through the front door, I greeted her with a kiss and a smile that gave nothing away. "How was the conference?" I asked, taking her bag. "Exhausting," she replied, not quite meeting my eyes. "But informative. How was your weekend?" "Quiet," I said. "Missed you." "I missed you too," she said automatically, and I wondered how many times she had lied to me before, and how many times I had believed her without question. That night, as she unpacked, I noticed the conference materials she carefully arranged on our dresser: a folder, a name badge, a schedule of events. All props in her performance. She'd thought of everything. Almost everything. While she showered, I checked her phone. She'd changed her passcode. Our anniversary no longer worked. But I didn't need to see her messages to confirm what I already knew. The fact that she'd changed her passcode after years of transparency told me everything. That I put the phone back exactly as I'd found it. I had no intention of confronting her with evidence or demanding confessions. That wasn't part of my plan. The next day, I began my research. I've always been methodical. You have to be when you run your own business. But now I applied that same methodical attention to learning everything I could about Dr. Andrew Keller. LinkedIn told me he completed his residency at Massachusetts General Hospital before taking a position at a prestigious practice in Boston. He'd moved to Pineville 2 years ago, supposedly seeking a quieter lifestyle after his divorce. He served on the board of the local hospital and donated to several charities. A pillar of the community, at least on paper. Facebook showed me that he was an avid cyclist and wine enthusiast. He attended gallery openings and fundraisers. He had a wide circle of friends and acquaintances, many of whom commented on his posts with the kind of fawning admiration reserved for small-town celebrities. Rebecca appeared in several photos from office events, always standing a careful distance away, her body language giving nothing away. They were good at this game, but not good enough. I expanded my investigation. A few discreet questions at O'Malley's revealed that Dr. Keller was not as universally beloved as his social media presence suggested. The nurses thought he was arrogant. Several patients had complained about his bedside manner. And there were rumors, just rumors, mind you, about why his previous marriage had ended. Heard his ex caught him with one of the nurses, Tom O'Malley. Told me as he polished glasses. Not the first time, either, from what I hear. So, the good doctor had a pattern. Interesting that I needed more, though. More information, more leverage. And for that, I needed help. Mark Stevens, my state trooper friend, was my first recruit. Not that he knew he was being recruited. "I've been thinking about what you said," I told him over beers the following Friday. Rebecca was working late again. About seeing Rebecca and Dr. Keller. Mark looked uncomfortable. "Danny, I shouldn't have said anything." "No, I'm glad you did," I interrupted. "But I need to know for sure, before I do anything stupid." He studied me for a long moment. "What are you asking me to do?" "Nothing illegal," I assured him. "Just If you happen to see his car anywhere it shouldn't be, I'd appreciate a heads up. Mark hesitated, then nodded slowly. I can do that. But, Danny, whatever you're thinking about doing, I'm not going to hurt anyone, I said, which was both true and false. I had no intention of physical violence. The kind of hurt I was planning went much deeper. My next ally was Sarah Lopez, the receptionist at my hardware store and the most connected person in town. Sarah knew everyone and everything, not because she gossiped, but because people trusted her. She listened, she remembered, and she was fiercely loyal to me, especially after I'd given her a job when no one else would hire a single mother with no experience. Sarah, I said casually as we closed up the store one evening, you ever hear anything about Dr. Keller over at the medical center? She glanced up sharply. What kind of anything? Just curious about the guy, I shrugged. He seems to have quite the reputation around town. Sarah was quiet for a moment, arranging receipt paper with meticulous care. My cousin works in billing over there, she finally said. Says he's got a thing for married women. Less complicated, he tells them. No expectations. I kept my face neutral. Interesting. Why do you ask? Her eyes were keen, missing nothing. Just making conversation, I said lightly. She didn't believe me. Sarah was too smart for that, but she didn't press. Instead, she said, I'll keep an ear out. If that's helpful. It might be, I admitted. Whatever you need, Danny, she said simply. And I knew she meant it. My third source of information came from an unexpected quarter. Jacob Wright, the 19-year-old tech whiz who worked part-time at the store, overheard enough of my conversation with Sarah to piece things together. Mr. Mercer, he said as he helped me unload a shipment the next day. I could help you track them, if you wanted. I froze, a box of power tools in my hands. Track who? He gave me a look that said he wasn't fooled. There are apps for that. Nothing illegal, exactly. Just helpful. For peace of mind. I should have shut him down immediately. Told him he was out of line. But instead, I set down the box and said, tell me more. An hour later, I had 3 new apps on my phone and a crash course in modern surveillance technology. Location tracking, data recovery, even something that could mirror text messages under certain circumstances. I don't want to know what you're going to do with this stuff, Jacob said as he finished his tutorial. But whatever it is, they probably deserve it. I looked at this kid, this child, really, and wondered what experiences had made him so cynical so young. But I only said, thanks, Jacob. This stays between us. He nodded solemnly. Always, Mr. Mercer. The final piece fell into place when Diane Keller walked into my hardware store 3 days later. I'd never met Dr. Keller's ex-wife, though I knew she still lived in the area. She was a striking woman, tall and elegant, with the kind of bone structure that defied aging. I need a deadbolt, she announced. The best you have. Moving? I asked as I led her to the lock section. Changing locks, she corrected with a tight smile. Some habits die hard. I selected a high-security deadbolt and placed it on the counter. This one's virtually unpickable. I can install it for you, if you'd like. She studied me for a moment. You're Daniel Mercer. I nodded, surprised. I've seen your wife at my ex-husband's office, she explained. She's very efficient. There was something in her tone that made me look up sharply. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I knew that she knew. Just as I knew. Mrs. Keller, Diane, please. I went back to my maiden name. Diane, I amended. Would you like to get a cup of coffee? I'm about to close up anyway. She didn't hesitate. I'd like that very much, Daniel. Over coffee at the small cafe down the street, Diane told me everything I needed to know about Dr. Andrew Keller. His patterns, his manipulations, the way he cultivated relationships with married women, made them feel special, then discarded. Then when he grew bored, or when the situation became complicated. He'll tell Rebecca she's different, Diane said, stirring her latte. They're all different, until they're not. Did he? I began, then stopped, unsure how to phrase my question. Cheat on me with someone from his office. Diane finished for me. Yes, multiple someones, as it turned out. It's his hunting ground. I absorbed this, feeling a strange calm settle over me. Why are you telling me this? She set down her spoon with deliberate precision. Because when I found out about Andrew's activities, I made a scene. I screamed. I threw things. I told everyone who would listen what kind of man he really was. She looked up at me, her eyes hard. And do you know what happened? I shook my head. He came out looking like the reasonable one, the victim of a hysterical, vindictive ex-wife. She broke off, composing herself. While I lost friends, lost standing, nearly lost my job because I was so emotionally unstable. It took me years to rebuild my life. I'm sorry that happened to you, I said, and meant it. I don't want your pity, Daniel, she replied sharply. I want you to be smarter than I was. If you're planning to do something about your wife and my ex-husband, and I think you are, don't make my mistakes. I studied her for a long moment. What would you do differently if you could go back? A slow smile spread across her face, cold and satisfied. I'd destroy him so completely and so carefully that he'd never even know what hit him. She leaned forward, and I'd make sure he knew exactly why it was happening, but could never prove who was doing it. In that moment, Diane Keller became the most valuable ally in my quiet campaign. She understood, as no one else could, exactly what I was up against. And more importantly, she knew Andrew Keller's weaknesses in intimate detail. As we parted ways outside the cafe, she pressed a business card into my hand. My personal number is on the back, she said. Call me when you're ready to move forward. I watched her walk away, her spine straight, her head high. A woman who had survived public humiliation and private betrayal and emerged stronger. I tucked her card into my wallet, knowing I would be calling her soon. Very soon, by the end of the second week, I had assembled a comprehensive picture of the affair. Rebecca and Dr. Keller met 3 times a week, always under the guise of working late. Sometimes they actually did work late. Appearances had to be maintained, but more often, they slipped away to the Mountain View Inn, or occasionally to his modernist house on the outskirts of town when they were feeling particularly bold. They exchanged dozens of texts daily, careful never to be explicit, but the subtext was clear enough. They had pet names for each other, inside jokes, all the small intimacies that Rebecca and I had once shared, now repurposed for her lover. That I documented everything meticulously, filing away evidence, building my case piece by piece. Not for a confrontation. I had no interest in tearful confessions or desperate denials, but for what would come next. The dismantling of Dr. Andrew Keller and Rebecca Mercer. As January gave way to February, I finalized my strategy. It would take time, patience, perfect timing, but I had all 3 in abundance, and I had something they didn't: the element of surprise. Because as far as Rebecca and Dr. Keller knew, Daniel Mercer was still the trusting, oblivious husband, coaching Little League and running his hardware store, completely unaware that his wife was sleeping with another man. They had no idea that I was watching their every move, cataloging their every misstep, and preparing to bring their carefully constructed world crashing down around them. They thought they were so clever, so discreet. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The beauty of small towns lies in their interconnectedness. Everyone knows everyone. Information flows like water, finding its way into every crack and crevice. This can be suffocating when you crave privacy, but invaluable when you want to quietly influence public perception. My first move against Dr. Andrew Keller was subtle. So subtle, in fact, that no one, least of all Keller himself, would connect it to me. It began with a casual conversation with Peter Hoffman, the editor of the Pineville Gazette and a regular at my hardware store. Peter was planning a series of profiles on local business owners and professionals, and I suggested he include Dr. Keller. Great idea, Peter enthused. The new orthopedic surgeon. People are curious about him. I've heard he's quite the philanthropist, I remarked innocently. Donations to the hospital, charity work. Might make for an interesting angle. Peter made a note in his small leather-bound notebook. Thanks, Danny. I'll look into it. What Peter would find, when he looked into Dr. Keller's charitable giving, was a carefully constructed facade. Because during my research, I had discovered something interesting. While Keller talked extensively about his philanthropic endeavors, there was surprisingly little evidence of actual donations. That he served on boards. Yes. Attended fundraisers. Absolutely. But the substantial financial contributions he hinted at in conversation, those were harder to verify. I knew this because Diane Keller had told me. It was one of our biggest fights, she had explained during our second coffee meeting. He wanted the reputation of a philanthropist without actually giving away the money. He'd promise donations, get the recognition, then find excuses why the funds had to be delayed. The Gazette profile, when it appeared 2 weeks later, was factual and measured. Peter was too good a journalist to print accusations without evidence. But he did note that when asked about specific donations, Dr. Keller had been reluctant to provide details, citing a preference for anonymous giving, a phrase that anyone reading between the lines would recognize as a polite way of suggesting that there might be less there than met. The EYE.IT was a small crack in the facade. Nothing more. But it was a start. My second move targeted Keller's professional reputation. This required more finesse, as I had no desire to harm his patients or interfere with legitimate medical care. But I did have access to a resource Keller didn't know about. His ex-wife, Diane Keller, it turned out, had kept meticulous records of her ex-husband's professional missteps during their marriage. Nothing criminal. Andrew Keller was too careful for that. But numerous instances of ethical corners cut, professional courtesies abused, and colleagues stepped on in his climb up the career ladder. He hasn't changed, Diane confirmed after. I described his current behavior at the medical center based on Sarah Lopez's reports. Still taking credit for other people's work, still charming the administrative staff while bullying the nurses. Armed with this knowledge, I made a point of befriending several members of the hospital board during community events. I never mentioned Keller directly. Instead, I asked general questions about hospital governance, physician oversight, the complaint process. I expressed concern about hypothetical situations that happened to mirror Keller's known behaviors. Seeds planted, I waited. Meanwhile, I continued my campaign of meticulous documentation. Jacob, my tech-savvy employee, had shown me how to use a GPS tracker app that I installed on Rebecca's phone during one of her showers. Not to track her movements. I already knew where she was going, but to establish patterns that would be useful later. I also began laying the groundwork for the financial aspects of my plan. Rebecca and I had joint accounts, as most married couples do, but I had always handled our investments. Now, I started reorganizing those investments, ostensibly as part of a new retirement strategy. Just trying to be more aggressive with our portfolio. I explained when Rebecca noticed the paperwork on my desk. We're not getting any younger. She accepted this without question, too preoccupied with her affair to pay close attention to the financial maneuverings that would eventually leave her at a significant disadvantage. By mid-February, my preliminary moves were in place. The whispers about Dr. Keller had begun to circulate, nothing damning, just questions, doubts, the faintest suggestion that all might not be as it seemed with Pineville's golden boy surgeon. It was time to escalate. The opportunity came sooner than I expected, courtesy of Jacob Wright. Mr. Mercer, he said one afternoon as we closed the store, I might have found something you should see. He showed me his phone, where he'd been monitoring various social media platforms connected to Dr. Keller. Specifically, a patient review site where Keller had an impeccable 5-star rating. Look at the review dates, Jacob pointed out. Notice anything? I studied the screen. Most of the glowing reviews had been posted in clusters, 3 or 4 on the same day, then nothing for weeks. That's unusual, I commented. Yeah, and check this out. Jacob switched to another screen showing the IP addresses associated with the reviews. Half of these came from the same location, the medical center's network. I stared at him. Are you saying Keller is posting fake reviews of himself? Jacob shrugged. Or having someone do it for him. Either way, it's against the site's terms of service. Probably against medical ethics rules too. I considered this information carefully. Using it directly would reveal that someone was investigating Keller, which I wanted to avoid. But there were other ways to leverage this discovery. Jacob, I said slowly, how hard would it be to ensure that this information reached the right people without it being traced back to us? He grinned. That's kind of my specialty, Mr. Mercer. 2 days later, an anonymous tipster emailed the evidence to the state medical board, the hospital ethics committee, and several reputable patient advocacy groups. The email came from a throwaway account, routed through multiple VPNs, and contained just enough information to raise serious concerns without revealing the source. The response was swift. The review site launched an investigation. The hospital board scheduled a special meeting, and Dr. Andrew Keller found himself suddenly on the defensive, having to explain why dozens of his supposedly satisfied patients all seemed to be posting from his office network. Often outside normal business hours, IT wasn't enough to ruin him professionally. Fake reviews, while unethical, weren't the kind of offense that ends medical careers, but it tarnished his reputation. More importantly, it distracted him, made him paranoid, kept him looking in all the wrong directions while I continued my work behind the scenes. Rebecca noticed the change in his demeanor. Andrew seems stressed, she commented one evening, catching herself too late. I mean, Dr. Keller, there's some issue with the hospital board. That's too bad. I replied mildly, turning a page in my book. Office politics can be brutal. She glanced at me sharply, but I kept my expression neutral, interested but not overly so. Just a husband making conversation. Yes, she said finally. I guess they can be. That night, I heard her on the phone in the bathroom, speaking in low, urgent tones. Comforting him, no doubt. Assuring him that whatever was happening, they would get through it together. Let her comfort him, I thought. Let her believe she could protect him. It would make what came next all the more devastating. Because while the fake review scandal was unfolding, I was preparing my third move. One that would strike directly at the heart of their relationship. I had finally gained access to their text messages, thanks to Jacob's technical expertise and a brief window of opportunity when Rebecca left her phone unattended. What I found confirmed everything I already knew, but with an unexpected bonus. Dr. Keller wasn't just seeing Rebecca. There were messages from at least 2 other women, both married, both using the same kinds of coded language and meeting arrangements that Rebecca used. The good doctor was running multiple affairs simultaneously, compartmentalizing his time with military precision. Did Rebecca know? I doubted it. The messages suggested that each woman believed she was special, unique, the only one who truly understood him. This was the leverage I needed, not for confrontation, but for something much more insidious. Using a prepaid phone purchased with cash in a neighboring town, I sent identical text messages to the other 2 women. I know about you and Dr. Keller. So does my husband. We need to talk. Meet me at the Lakeside Cafe tomorrow at 2 p.m. Come alone. Rebecca Mercer. Then I waited. Both women showed up, of course. Curiosity, fear, and the desperate need to contain the potential scandal guaranteed their attendance. But instead of finding Rebecca, they found each other. 2 frightened, confused women who quickly realized they'd been summoned by an unknown third party. That I watched from my truck across the street as recognition dawned, as they began to talk. As the pieces fell into place, I saw the shock, the betrayal, the humiliation play across their faces. And I saw them reach for their phones, no doubt to confront the man who had been lying to them all. That I didn't need to witness the aftermath to know what would happen next. The frantic calls and texts, the demands for explanations, the tearful recriminations. Dr. Andrew Keller's carefully compartmentalized romantic life imploding all at once, with no warning and no time to craft his usual smooth excuses, and Rebecca, caught completely by surprise as the other women's names and accusations filled her screen, suddenly forced to confront the fact that she wasn't special after all, just one of many in Dr. Keller's rotating cast of married conquests. The beauty of this approach was its deniability. If questioned, the 2 women would insist they'd been summoned by Rebecca. Rebecca would deny it vehemently. Dr. Keller, trapped in a web of his own making, would have no idea who had orchestrated his downfall. That evening, Rebecca came home. Late, her eyes red-rimmed, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. Everything okay? I asked, looking up from the dinner I'd prepared. Fine, she said shortly. Just a difficult day at work. I'm not hungry. She went straight upstairs and locked herself in the bathroom. Through the door, I could hear the muffled sounds of sobbing. I ate my dinner alone, savoring each bite, feeling neither joy nor sorrow at her pain. Only a cool sense of satisfaction that the plan was working exactly as intended. The first phase of my campaign against Dr. Andrew Keller and my unfaithful wife was complete. Their perfect little affair was no longer perfect. The trust was broken. The illusion of specialness shattered. Now it was time for phase 2. Social isolation. In a small town like Pineville, reputation is currency. And I was about to ensure that Dr. Keller and Rebecca went bankrupt. In Pineville, social standing took decades to build, but only days to destroy. This fundamental truth became the cornerstone of my second phase, ensuring that both Rebecca and Dr. Keller would find themselves increasingly isolated from the community they had once navigated with such confidence. The revelation of Dr. Keller's multiple affairs had already created fractures in their relationship, but I needed more. I needed the entire town to slowly turn against them, not through dramatic accusations, but through 1,000 subtle cuts that would bleed their reputations dry. I began with Rebecca's closest friends. Linda Maxwell and Carolyn Porter had been her confidants since high school. They met monthly for book club, which had recently become Rebecca's cover for evenings with Keller at O'Malley's. One Friday evening, I ran into Linda's husband, Jeffrey. "Danny, how the hell are you?" he called, clapping me on the shoulder. "Feels like we haven't seen you in ages. You and Rebecca should come over for dinner soon." I gave him a bewildered look. "That's kind of you, Jeff. I assumed, given everything that's happened, you guys wouldn't be comfortable with that." "What do you mean? What happened?" I feigned sudden embarrassment. "Oh God, you don't know. I assumed Linda would have told you. Just forget I said anything, okay?" But Jeff, as I knew he would, pressed for details. I reluctantly confided that Rebecca had been lying about book club meetings to meet someone else. I didn't name Keller. I didn't have to. The careful confusion and concern in my performance was enough. "I'm trying to work through it," I told him, my voice deliberately steady. "For now, I'd appreciate if you didn't mention this conversation to Linda. Rebecca should be the one to tell her friends when she's ready." Jeff agreed, but I knew exactly what would happen. He would tell Linda. Linda would confront Rebecca, and the careful house of lies Rebecca had built would begin to collapse. Similar accidental revelations to Carolyn's husband and several other strategic connections ensured that within 2 weeks, Rebecca's social circle was buzzing with whispers. I never accused her directly. I merely planted seeds of doubt and let them grow on their own. For Dr. Keller, I took a different approach. The hospital board meeting regarding his fake reviews had ended with a warning rather than sanctions, precisely as I had anticipated. But the damage to his reputation had been done. People were beginning to question his integrity that I built on this foundation through Diane Keller, who still maintained connections in the medical community. Andrew's becoming quite the topic of conversation, she told me during one of our regular coffee meetings, especially among the nursing staff. Apparently, he's been showing favoritism to certain female employees. That must make for a difficult work environment. I observed that Diane's smile was cold, particularly now that some of those nurses have received anonymous emails detailing his pattern with married women. Professional boundaries are so important in healthcare, don't you think? I raised my eyebrows, but said nothing. Diane had taken her own initiative, it seemed. I respected her for it. The impact of these maneuvers became evident at the Pineville Hospital Charity Gala in early March. Rebecca and I attended. Keeping up appearances was crucial to my strategy, and I watched as she tried to navigate a room that had once welcomed her warmly, but now regarded her with cool politeness. Dr. Keller arrived alone, his usual confident stride diminished. I observed from across the room as he approached various groups, only to see conversations abruptly shift or die altogether. When he tried to join the hospital director at her table, she smiled tightly and made a show of checking her watch before excusing herself. The isolation was working, but it wasn't enough. The next phase of my plan required financial preparation. For years, I had handled our investments, with Rebecca showing little interest in the details. Now, that trust would prove costly for her. Over the previous 2 months, I had systematically moved our most valuable assets into accounts that would be difficult to divide in a divorce. I consulted discreetly with a divorce attorney in Boston, far enough from Pineville to avoid gossip, who advised me on the legal boundaries of what I could do. I couldn't hide assets outright. That would be illegal. But I could make strategic investments, convert liquid assets into business inventory for the hardware store, and ensure that the paper trail for our major purchases heavily favored my contributions. Rather than Rebecca's, that I also began documenting every inconsistency in Rebecca's behavior. Her late nights, her unexplained expenses, the lies about conferences and book clubs, all carefully logged with dates, times, and supporting evidence where possible. Not because I intended to confront her with this information, but because it would prove invaluable when the time came for legal proceedings. By late March, the social and professional damage to both Rebecca and Dr. Keller was substantial. Their relationship had survived the revelation of his other affairs. Rebecca, it seemed, had chosen to believe his protestations that those relationships were over and she was truly the one. But the strain was evident in her increasing anxiety. and his deteriorating performance at work. Reports from Sarah Lopez's cousin in billing indicated that Dr. Keller had begun making uncharacteristic mistakes in his patient charting. Nothing dangerous, but enough to raise eyebrows among his colleagues. He had also been passed over for the department head position he had been actively campaigning for, a position that had instead gone to a less experienced but more trusted physician. Rebecca, meanwhile, had lost weight, her clothes hanging loosely. On her frame, dark circles shadowed her eyes, and the vibrant energy that had once defined her had dimmed considerably. Several times, I caught her staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, something between suspicion and regret. Still, I maintained my facade of oblivious trust. I brought her tea when she seemed tired. I asked about her day with genuine seeming interest. I played the role of the devoted husband so convincingly that sometimes I almost believed it myself. And all the while, I continued gathering evidence, building my case, preparing for the final act of my retribution. The catalyst came in early April, courtesy of Diane Keller. She called me one evening while Rebecca was working late. "Daniel," she said without preamble, "I've just heard something you need to know. Andrew has been offered a position at a hospital in Chicago. He's planning to take it, and from what my source tells me, he's asked Rebecca to go with him." I felt a cold stillness settle over me. When the offer just came through, he has 2 weeks to decide, but he's already told his department head he's accepting it. They'll probably make the move in June. "Thank you for telling me," I said, my mind already calculating adjustments to my timeline. "What will you do?" Diane asked, a note of concern in her voice. "Exactly what I planned to do," I replied, just sooner than expected. It was time to initiate the endgame. On a quiet Tuesday in mid-April, I filed for divorce, not in Pineville, where the filing would have been immediate gossip, but in the county seat 30 miles away. I cited irreconcilable differences rather than adultery, not out of any desire to protect Rebecca's reputation, but because it suited my strategy better to appear as the reasonable party seeking an amicable resolution that I didn't tell Rebecca. I wanted the papers to be served to her at work, where the humiliation would be public and complete. It was perhaps my one concession to cruelty in an otherwise clinical execution of justice. The server delivered the papers at 11:30 a.m. on a Thursday, timing I had specifically requested to ensure maximum exposure. Rebecca was at the front desk when the courier arrived, surrounded by colleagues and patients. Sarah's cousin in billing later described the scene. Rebecca's face draining of color as she realized what she was being handed, the hushed silence that fell over the reception area, the pitying glances from co-workers who had long suspected but never confirmed her affair. She called me 11 times before I finally answered, late that afternoon. By then, I had already initiated the second part of my plan that I had engaged the services of a private investigator weeks earlier, not to gather evidence of the affair, which I already had in abundance, but to document Dr. Keller's pattern of ethical lapses. The PI had delivered a comprehensive report detailing instances of billing irregularities, prescription improprieties, and potential conflicts of interest with pharmaceutical companies. None of these violations were major enough to cost Keller his license, but collectively they painted a picture of a physician who routinely cut corners and prioritized personal gain over professional ethics. More importantly, they constituted legitimate grounds for the hospital board to reconsider his privileges that I delivered this report anonymously to the board chair on the same day Rebecca was served with divorce papers. The timing ensured that both Rebecca and Keller would be dealing with professional and personal crises simultaneously, with no opportunity to coordinate their responses or support each other effectively. When I finally took Rebecca's call, her voice was raw from crying. "How could you?" she demanded, without even talking to me first. "I thought it best to be efficient," I replied calmly. "My attorney advised against prolonging the process." "Your attorney? How long have you been planning this?" "About as long as you've been sleeping with Dr. Keller," I said, keeping my tone conversational. "Though I suspect you've been planning your move to Chicago for less time than that." Her sharp intake of breath confirmed what Diane had told me. "Danny, save it, Rebecca. I've already packed your things. You can pick them up anytime. I'll be staying with Mark for a few days to give you space to move out." "Move out? But this is my home too." "Actually, it's not," I informed her. "The house is in my name. It was my inheritance from my father, if you recall." The deed has never included you. This was technically true, though deliberately misleading. While the initial inheritance had been solely mine, we had refinanced several times during our marriage, and Rebecca did have a legal claim to a portion of the equity. But I wanted her off balance, uncertain of her footing in what would become an increasingly complex legal battle. "You can't just throw me out," she protested. "I have rights." "Of course you do," I agreed reasonably. "Your rights will be fully respected during the legal proceedings. In the meantime, you're welcome to stay with Dr. Keller. I understand his house on Lakeside Drive is quite spacious." There was a long silence before Rebecca spoke again, her voice small and hollow. "You knew. All this time you knew." "Yes. The hospital board meeting today, that was you too, wasn't it?" I neither confirmed nor denied, letting her draw her own conclusions. "Why like this?" she finally asked. "Why not just confront me? Why go after Andrew's job? His reputation?" I considered my answer carefully. "Because you didn't just betray me. Rebecca, you betrayed us. 15 years of us. And you did it with a man who collects married women like trophies. So no, a simple confrontation wouldn't have been adequate." "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered. "I believe that," I said, surprised to find that I did. "But you did it anyway. Goodbye, Rebecca." I ended the call and turned off my phone. Then I went to Mark's house, where I had indeed arranged to stay while Rebecca cleared her things from our home. Mark asked no questions, just handed me a beer and put on a baseball game, giving me the space I needed to process the strange emptiness I felt now that my plan was in motion. The next few weeks unfolded exactly as I had anticipated. Rebecca moved in with Dr. Keller. She had nowhere else to go, given that most of her friends had distanced themselves following the revelations about her affair. The hospital board launched a formal investigation into Keller's practices, placing him on administrative leave pending the outcome. Our divorce proceedings began, and as expected, Rebecca was shocked to discover how thoroughly I had documented her infidelity and how carefully I had arranged our financial affairs to my advantage. Her attorney, a competent but overworked local lawyer, was no match for the specialized divorce attorney I had retained from Boston, the town of Pineville. Meanwhile, had fully embraced the drama. Despite my outward stance of dignified restraint, the details of Rebecca's affair and Dr. Keller's professional misconduct leaked steadily into public consciousness. I never had to say a word. Others did all the talking for me. "Did you hear? Rebecca Mercer was sleeping with Dr. Keller all those times she claimed to be working late. Apparently, he's done this before. His ex-wife caught him with a nurse in Boston. The hospital board found billing irregularities. He was charging for procedures he didn't perform. Poor Danny. 15 years of marriage, and she throws it away. For a charlatan." The whispers followed Rebecca and Keller everywhere they went. At the grocery store, at restaurants, at the few social events they still dared to attend. People they had considered friends now avoided eye contact or made excuses to be elsewhere. Invitations dried up. Community leadership positions were quietly reassigned to others. By early May, the hospital board concluded its investigation. While they found insufficient evidence to terminate Dr. Keller's privileges entirely, they placed him on probation and removed him from several lucrative committees. More damaging still, they required him to complete an ethics course and submit to quarterly audits of his billing practices. The Chicago job offer was quietly withdrawn. Our divorce was finalized in record time, largely due to Rebecca's increasing desperation to be done with the process. In the final settlement, I retained the house, the hardware store, and 70% of our joint investments. Rebecca received a cash payment that, while technically fair based on our prenuptial agreement, left her in a significantly weaker financial position than she had anticipated. "You destroyed me," she said quietly as we left the courthouse after the final hearing. It was the first time we had spoken directly in weeks. "No," I corrected her. "I merely ensured that actions had consequences. We could have worked it out." She insisted. "You didn't have to do all this." I studied her face, still beautiful despite the stress of recent months, still the face I had loved for most of my adult life. "Maybe," I conceded, "but you didn't give me that chance." She looked away first. "We're leaving town, starting over somewhere new." "I know," I said simply, and I did know. Diane had kept me informed of Keller's increasingly desperate attempts to secure a position elsewhere, his reputation now tarnished just enough to make prestigious hospitals wary, but not enough to prevent him from practicing entirely. He had finally accepted an offer at a small practice in Arizona, a significant step down from his previous ambitions, but the best he could manage under the circumstances. Rebecca would follow him, of course. She had burned too many bridges in Pineville to stay. Her job at the medical center had become untenable once the affair became public knowledge. Her friends had largely sided with me, the wronged husband, who had handled the betrayal with such dignified restraint. Even her parents, retired in Florida, had expressed their disappointment in their monthly phone calls. There was nothing left for her here except painful memories and pitying glances that I watched her walk away from the courthouse, shoulders squared. Despite everything, and felt a complicated mixture of emotions I couldn't quite name. Not satisfaction exactly, not regret. Perhaps a kind of somber recognition that justice, once served, rarely tastes as sweet as anticipated. Rebecca and Dr. Keller left Pineville 2 weeks later. They didn't say goodbye to anyone. They simply loaded their belongings into a rented moving truck one Sunday morning and drove away, leaving behind the whispers and judgment that had become the soundtrack of their lives. That I heard later that some teenagers had spray-painted cheaters on Keller's empty house the night after they left. I didn't condone the vandalism, but I understood the sentiment. In a small town, betrayal is never just personal. It ripples outward, touching everyone, demanding a reckoning. My reckoning had been methodical, measured, and ultimately more devastating than any public confrontation could have been. I had dismantled their lives piece by piece, all while maintaining the moral high ground in the eyes of the community. I had ensured that every time they looked at each other in their new life, they would remember what their affair had cost them. Was it worth it? I asked myself this question often in the quiet evenings at the house that was now mine alone. Had the months of planning, the careful manipulation, the strategic destruction of their reputations brought me the closure I sought? I wasn't sure, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I had refused to be the pitted, betrayed husband of Pineville gossip. I had taken control of a narrative that might otherwise have broken me. I had turned their secret weapon, deception, against them with a precision they never saw coming. In the end, that knowledge would have to be enough. 6 months after Rebecca and Dr. Keller left town, life in Pineville had largely returned to normal. The scandal, once the favorite topic of conversation at O'Malley's and the salon and the church coffee hour, had faded into the background, replaced by newer, fresher gossip. The hardware store continued to thrive under my management. I promoted Sarah Lopez to assistant manager, recognizing her loyalty and discretion during the difficult months of my campaign against Rebecca and Keller. Jacob Wright, my tech-savvy young employee, was now attending community college part-time. With my encouragement and financial support, Mark Stevens remained a steadfast friend, though he still occasionally gave me searching looks when he thought I wasn't paying attention. He had never asked for details about what exactly I had done to orchestrate Rebecca and Keller's downfall, but I suspected he had pieced most of it together. "You ever think about dating again?" he asked one evening as we watched a baseball game. On his deck, "Diane, Keller seems to like you." I smiled faintly. Diane and I still met occasionally for coffee, bound by our shared experience of betrayal and our collaboration in its aftermath. There was a certain attraction there. She was intelligent, formidable, and understood me in ways few others could, but we both recognized the unhealthy foundation such a relationship would have. "I'm not ready," I told Mark truthfully. "Maybe. Someday." He nodded, accepting this without further comment. The truth was, I wasn't sure I would ever be ready to trust someone that completely again. The experience had changed me in ways I was still discovering, had hardened something in me that I wasn't sure could be softened again. That I received a postcard from Arizona in November. No message, just a desert landscape and Rebecca's handwriting. On the address, I stood in my kitchen for a long time, staring at it, wondering what she had meant to communicate with this wordless gesture. Regret? Defiance? A simple acknowledgement that she had survived my retribution? I never found out. It was the last I heard from her. Dr. Andrew Keller didn't fare as well in his new position. According to Diane, who still maintained connections that kept her informed of her ex-husband's activities, he had struggled to build a patient base in Arizona. The small practice he had joined had eventually let him go, citing personality conflicts. He was now working locum tenens positions, temporary assignments filling in for other physicians, moving from hospital to hospital like a modern-day medical nomad. Rebecca had left him shortly after they lost their apartment in Phoenix, unable to sustain the relationship once the external pressures of Pineville were removed and the reality of who Andrew Keller truly was became impossible to ignore. I felt no satisfaction in hearing this, only a weary recognition that patterns tend to repeat themselves and that people rarely change their essential nature, even when given every incentive to do so. As for me, I continued coaching Little League on weekends. I joined the town council when a seat opened up. I expanded the hardware store's inventory to include more specialty items that couldn't be found at the big box stores. I built a life that was, if not exactly happy, at least complete in itself. And sometimes, in the quiet evenings at home, I would sit on the porch with a bourbon and look at the white picket fence I had built with my own hands, now weathered and in need of repainting, and think about the nature of justice and revenge, of love and betrayal, of the thin line between being the architect of one's own destiny and the prisoner of one's own making. I had won, by any objective measure. I had emerged from the ordeal with my reputation, finances, and social standing not just intact, but enhanced. I was poor Danny Mercer, who had handled his wife's infidelity with such grace and dignity. I was respected, even admired, for my restraint in the face of such betrayal. Only I knew the truth, that there had been nothing restrained about my response, that I had systematically, methodically destroyed two people's lives while maintaining a facade of innocent victimhood, that the public humiliation Rebecca and Keller had suffered had been orchestrated down to the smallest detail by the man everyone believed had been blindsided by their affair. Was I proud of what I had done? Not exactly, but I didn't regret it either. In a world where the faithful are too often made fools of, where betrayal frequently goes unpunished, I had ensured that actions had consequences, that I had refused to be a victim of their story. Instead, I had written my own ending, one where justice, cold and precise, was served not with dramatic confrontations or violent outbursts, but with patience, intelligence, and an intimate understanding of how small towns work. That it wasn't happily ever after, but it was, in its way, a silent reckoning. And that would have to be enough. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe to our channel for more real-life accounts of betrayal and its consequences. Remember, these stories are shared not to promote vengeance, but to illustrate the human capacity for resilience. In the face of profound betrayal, sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about getting better.